Or your new pastor.
That means I can't say anything.
That's funny. So, well, welcome and thank you all for taking the time to come and to participate as we engage in this kind of 3-week mini sessions of leadership study as it pertains to some of the questions and thoughts and provocative discussion that has to do around coming as a church out of the pandemic. And I think even before I had suggested that we do this study, and as it happens in timing, we've just had this rush of pronouncements from a governmental level and church level as well that it has come quicker and faster than I think most of us would have anticipated. And Mike will tell you and Chip that we had a Healthy Church team meeting yesterday, and so the Healthy Church team will be reporting out to the council about different things that we talked about, but things are changing quickly, so it's kind of appropriate that we would engage in this type of discussion and book study as we begin this. And also, I had found, I think in my brief tenure with you, that I love our council meetings, and they're great and they're informative, but with so many reports needing to be made, and we do a good job of sending those beforehand, and hopefully reading them, and people are real succinct, but still there's just a great number of them, that it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for ministry strategy and brainstorming and kind of creative thinking types of things. So, I hope that this might be a springboard to some of that for the future, and that might help us to go. And I also thought it was important to begin this conversation. Obviously with me leaving, we're not going to be making decisions, and that was never the intent of this, to make decisions or make pronouncements and things like that, but rather to begin to put some scaffolding around maybe some questions for the future as Kevin comes, and as you guys have those conversations with him and as a church together, and seek to discern that. So with all that said, why don't we open with a word of prayer, and then we'll go ahead and get into what we're going to talk about for tonight. So let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for this time that we are able to have to come together, Lord, to talk about and to discern and to just hear from you and hear from each other about ministry in your church at Trinity United Methodist Church. And Lord, we pray that as we come and as we read this book, that you just open our minds and our hearts to what you'd have us to receive, that you'd lead us and guide us, and that you'd be a part of this conversation. And Lord, we pray that our conversation would be fruitful. We pray that it would bring you honor and bring you glory. And Lord, we just pray that you just bless this time that we have together. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, what I have for us to look at is PowerPoint, so that I can keep my thoughts straight. And so I'm going to attempt to share that here. And can you all see that? It should say Leadership Study, Trinity UMC, the Post-Quarantine Church. And so that's a little book that we have decided to read and to base our study around. And I have found it's a real easy read. And so if you had an opportunity to buy the book and to read it, you would have found that it's pretty easy read, and it's not a very thick book. But though it's not thick, I think it has a lot of good things to say. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit about who Tom Rainer is. So there's this picture that I pulled off. And so I pulled this off of, he runs kind of a website now, I guess, or ministry that's called Church Answers. And so I'm just going to go ahead and read this for us. So with nearly 40 years of ministry experience, Tom Rainer has spent a lifetime committed to the growth and health of the local church and her leaders. Prior to founding Church Answers, and that's the group that he's with now, that he founded the company, Tom served as president and CEO of Lifeway Christian Resources, some of y'all might remember there was a Lifeway Christian store in Central Park. And so Lifeway is kind of the Baptist equivalent of Cokesbury, if you would. Before coming to Lifeway, he served at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary for 12 years, where he was the founding dean of the Billy Graham School of Missions and Evangelism. He's a 1977 graduate of the University of Alabama and earned his Master's of Divinity and PhD degrees from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. In addition to speaking in hundreds of venues over the past 20 years, Tom led the Rayner Group, a church and denominational consulting firm from 1990 to 2005. The firm provided church health insights to over 500 churches and other organizations over that period. Tom is the author of more than 24 books. And so that's a little bit about Tom Rayner. He comes with a lot of experience. It's in his first book. It's not his first rodeo. He's served in churches, served as a consultant, has a wide variety of experience. And so I think he's well qualified to speak to what he speaks to. So that's a little bit about who Tom Rayner is. So up here on the screen, you see some Chinese language. How about that? And I don't know if anybody's ever heard this before, but when written in Chinese, the word crisis in Chinese is composed of two characters, and you see them, the red and the blue there on your screen. One of those characters that represents the word for crisis is the same character that represents danger, and the other one represents opportunity. And so as we think about pandemic and quarantines and things like that, certainly we might think about that as a crisis, but in that is not only danger can be very dangerous, but also in the midst of crisis, there are opportunities. I share that with you because I think that's kind of the premise that Tom Rayner bases this book upon, and that is that, you know, the pandemic is full of challenges, it has been full of challenges, but it's kind of a watershed moment that offers the local church an opportunity to maybe think in some new ways and do things in a different way than it might have before. And that's what kind of the 6 challenges that he goes through are all about. So Rayner's premise is that while the pandemic has been full of challenges, the pandemic also offers great opportunities for the church. Had anyone heard that before about the Chinese word for crisis and that? No. Okay. Dave, you have? I see you're shaking your head. Yeah. The rest of y'all can't see it and scroll down. Okay, John and Chip and B, had you heard it?
No, he didn't tell me everything.
Nah. You hold back on you. So when we think about danger and opportunity, some of what I'm going to share with you tonight is kind of just my observations and my reading as I've gone through some things, as well as many of the kind of highlights that I picked out come directly from the book. But you know, one of the things that we have heard about, I kind of think, I don't know how it's been for you, but for me, ad nauseum, is the new normal, right? Everyone says things aren't going to go back to the way they were. And so I heard somebody just the other day say, instead of the new normal, maybe we think about the next normal. Well, I don't know if there's much difference between the new normal and the next normal, but at least it's not called the new normal, and maybe it's just a word play. But I like the next normal. But, you know, it is widely recognized that things have changed kind of dramatically. And so Rayner's point is that's okay. That is not something to fear, but something to embrace, to kind of take your mindset from looking at how terrible some of this might be to looking at it as an opportunity, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. So to be excited and to be encouraged. And I think this is a really good point that he makes, and I've made it before, and that is that not only is God with us, but he's gone before us. So the pandemic wasn't a surprise. The quarantine wasn't a surprise. This post-quarantine time that we might be entering into now has not caught God by surprise. None of it was a surprise to the Lord. So that is hopefully something of comfort. So Rayner would suggest that instead of having a woe is us mindset in all of this, that we have an opportunity maybe here to adjust to this change as a church, to maybe do things differently or look at things in a little bit of a different light. So for those of you that have been doing the Joshua study, I pulled out this quote: "Enter this new land of possibilities with hope, promise, and enthusiasm." So just as our friends, the Israelites, entered into the promised land, so maybe we are entering into a new land of possibilities as we move forward in the church. What I want to do is I have a couple of little poll questions to make this a little bit interactive. I don't know if y'all have done polls before on Zoom, so I'm going to attempt to launch it. So this first poll question is this, and I'm going to put it up in just a second. But what has been the hardest part of the pandemic as it relates to church? And so I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So you should hopefully see that up on your screen right now, and it's all anonymous. And so, yeah, if you want to discuss it, those of you that are together as couples, you can. And like I said, it is anonymous. And so, so what has been the hardest part of the pandemic as it relates to church? Is it not seeing others, not being able to sing, no fellowship dinners, no in-person studies or meetings, or is it some other thing that's not reflected there in that poll? So take a minute or so, you guys can discuss or think about it. And then once we get everyone voted, we'll go ahead and close the poll and look at the results. And again, it's anonymous, so. Okay, looks like everybody has voted. So I'm going to end the poll and then I'm going to share the results with you. So it's pretty evenly divided, actually, amongst our large sample group here. Not seeing others, one person said, two people said not being able to sing. Interestingly, no one said anything about fellowship dinners. Not that nobody misses that, but maybe it doesn't rank the highest. No in-person studies or meetings, and then other. And I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but if somebody put other and they're willing to share what the other was, would you be willing to share? And if everyone just remains quiet, I'll just move on. But does anybody want to? If you put other, you want to say?
We put other.
Okay.
Rob, and I thought we were torn with not seeing others, but it's not just the seeing. It is the interacting. It's the fellowship. It's much more than just seeing and being in a crowd. It is that whole gestalt of fellowship, and I'm saying the same words over and over again, but
Then you can just stop talking.
Okay, then I can just stop talking, she says.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from now. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you. Let me see if I can't launch the second one here. Okay, so this one is going to be like the first one, except it's going to be a little bit different in this sense. In your opinion, what is the most positive thing to come out of the pandemic as it relates to church? And so I'll go ahead and launch that. And one choice is we checked up on each other more. Maybe we paid more attention to each other and how we were all doing. Second, we enhanced our online options at the church, mostly I would say in terms of worship, but also in terms of studies and things like that. We were still the church, even though we did not meet physically. We launched new outreach efforts, so say like Love Wednesday, or maybe there's something else. That's what the last one is, that catch-all, that maybe there was some other positive that's not reflected in the poll that you might be thinking about. So go ahead and take a couple minutes or so, how long it takes to discuss and think about that. Okay, it looks like everyone has voted, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So this one wasn't as spread out. So had two folks that said we enhanced our online options, and then second, we were still the church even though we did not meet physically. Interestingly enough, that strikes me that those are the two challenges that we're covering tonight in some ways. The second challenge has to do with online presence for the church in the future. And then the first challenge has to do about, thinking about our buildings differently. And, one of the main points that came out of the pandemic was that, one thing that's crystal clear is that the church, if it wasn't previously clear, that the church is not a building, right? The church is a people. So we were still the church, though we couldn't come to the physical location. And so, I have in the presentation, what's the old nursery rhyme? Here's the church, here's the steeple, open at the door, and here's all the people. And I don't remember exactly, how it goes, but that's that old hymn. I don't know how old it is, but in the hymnal, I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. Just that idea that the church is people. So, okay, well, thank you for participating in those. And we'll get back to our presentation. So some of the things that we have learned as a church during the pandemic. And so as was reflected in that poll, we learned we were still the church, though we were not meeting in person, not meeting in a building. We were still very much a church. These are ones that I just came up with. And so I'll be interested to see if you have ones to add. We learned that Zoom was a great tool, right? But depending on how much you used it in other capacities for meetings, you might have gotten Zoom fatigue, or you might have thought that, online worship and Zoom Bible studies have their place and they've been great, but for many of us, it didn't replace in-person gatherings. That it was good, but it was different, we might say. So that might be a learning. Seeing people makes a difference. One of the things that I had heard, especially when we went back to some form of in-person worship, though we couldn't see each other's mouths, a lot of people said just seeing people helped them to feel better. We learned a lot technologically. If you think about it, when we first started this pandemic, we as a church were battling with Facebook Live, right? Trying to get it to work and to broadcast. At that time in our church, we just had it was DSL, wasn't it, Mike, that we had? And then we were able to get an enhanced Wi-Fi, which was great and made things much easier. And so now we kind of don't miss a beat. We pre-record and upload it to Facebook and YouTube so that it comes at 10:30. So, the church has come a long way, and the pandemic kind of forced that. And so as we talked about good things, that was another one of the good things that we talked about that in that poll, but the church has come a long way and should be proud. We've gotten used to, and we've used Zoom. The church has its own license now, so I don't think 2 years ago, any of us probably had heard of Zoom. And here we are, doing this leadership study via Zoom. We also use something, you might not have known the name for it, but it's called Mailchimp. And so Mailchimp is the program that Lori and I use to send the email newsletters every Thursday, or to send the Sunday morning thing. And so that allowed us to better communicate and do so more frequently, which I think was important during this pandemic time, to have that connection and to hear about kind of what was happening in the life of the church. And then as soon as I move you all's pretty faces so I can see the screen. We also use Google Forms for registration and signups. And so there's quite a lot of things we learned technologically as a church. What other things have we learned before we get into the first challenge? Anything that I missed?
Okay.
I have been a part of small groups from other churches that that I just happened upon, maybe seeing something in Facebook or whatever. But I found it was nice to meet other people from other churches, and they were very willing to accept me, even though I didn't go to their church. So that was really nice.
Okay, so I guess we would call that ecumenism, right? We're
Yeah.
or not as territorial as we usually are sometimes. So that's great. Yep. Any other things?
We were able to occasionally attend the same church services that our kids who were across the country were attending. And that was nice for us to then be able to discuss it later as a family.
Yeah. So something that you might not have had the chance for, apart from having to be hunkered down and doing online worship. So yeah, that's fun. That's great.
Well, I think one of the things that the author mentions, it's we're not tied to a date and time to be part of the worship service.
Yeah.
So if I have a conflict on Sunday morning at 10:30, I can still listen to the service at some later time or date.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm to it again.
Say that again, Chip.
I say, or listen to it again to catch nuances that I didn't hear the first time. To hear a different way of emphasizing something. It sometimes helps me to think through something the second time I hear it rather than just the first.
Yeah. 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 So I was just wondering, and I'm not sure if you are comfortable sharing or not, but for those of you that primarily watched online, thinking about Mike's comment and Tom Rayner's comment about, different times and places to be able to, worship, were folks primarily, 10:30 on Sunday was my ritual and routine, or so like I know, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying it, that because they always sign in later and say they do. Rob and Beverly, I think, would watch his sister's church around our church hour, 10 or 11 or something like that, and then watch ours later. So how about the rest of you all? Did you find yourself 10:30 on Sunday and keeping that schedule, or do you find yourself doing it, watching and worshiping when it's a different time? Or anybody want to share?
Well, I usually, I'm sorry, but I usually stuck with 10:30 on Sunday, and if something interfered, then I would go back later.
I got you.
Same here. Yeah, we stuck to 10:30. They made it a point to be in front of the computer at the time that the message was being premiered.
Gotcha.
Same here.
Yeah. Yeah, I know one of the things that a lot of people talked about very early on in the pandemic, as kind of everything was thrown up into upheaval, was just getting back into some sense of routine. And so keeping maybe 10:30 was maybe helpful for folks. So good.
One of the other things that I think that we've learned from this is we need to, there's value in maintaining an online donation option for people. We were close a couple years ago or so. The finance committee had discussed whether we should retain that capability because it was not being used, and we were paying small service charge to keep it. And the pandemic has shown that we need to keep that, and people will respond and will donate in that manner when they need to, or when it's convenient for them.
Sure. Yeah. So it was great to have that already in place, because a lot of churches were confronted, especially churches our size, with one of the big questions for churches when this pandemic started was, how are we ever going to collect it's just a very practical question, the offering we used to collect in person, and to pay the bills. Now, thankfully, our church was in good financial shape anyways, but, I know of other churches that had large mortgages to pay. And so the ability to have folks, be able to mail in or to do online, I think was very helpful, and was just one less thing that the church had to pivot to with the online, because it was already set up. So it's just a matter of kind of educating people about it and directing people toward it. Ben, I guess the interesting thing to watch in the future will be how much it's utilized when there is a semblance to the next normal in terms of gathering in person again. If people will continue to use that or not. Of course, the broad brushstroke that is painted is that younger people tend to use that more, but I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But yeah, thanks. That was a good point. Good point. Okay, well, Rainer basically breaks this book down into 6 challenges or opportunities. And so we're going to take up the first one here, and then the second one a little bit later. But the first one has to do with gathering differently and better. Gathering differently and better. So what I had taken out of this, and what I always like to share with the churches I serve, is somewhat of a theology of our buildings. And I have to tell you, and I think I might have shared this with the Wednesday night Bible conversations. I tend to forget where I share and what I share. So I know some of you are going to tell me get used to it or something like that. But so if I shared this with you before, just humor me and listen again. If I haven't, then just kind of listen in. But my first full-time appointment was to the Kenwood United Methodist Church in Elmont, just south of Ashland, center of the universe, home to Randolph-Macon College.
Go Jackets.
Yay.
I knew I'd get a response. And so that church was a small church, probably a little bit smaller than Trinity even. And it was located on, I think it was like 1.3 acres of land. And so there was 40 to 50 people at that church, and the church, God grew that church to about 80 people in about a year and a half. And so all of a sudden what happened is that parking became an issue, and classroom space became an issue, worship space became an issue. And so the church undertook this large study of possibly relocating the church to a minimum of 10 acres of land, still in the community, but something that would allow the church to expand and to build and to possibly even retain the old building and use it for more as a chapel for weddings and funerals and that type of thing, and incorporate stained glass windows from the old building into any new building that was built. And really the church undertook a good 6 to 9 months of visioning and had a vote on that, and ultimately decided not to pursue finding a new piece of land. But in the midst of all that, it was very revealing for me to see how tied we are to our buildings in many senses. So that church, I like to joke that they had, plaques for everything all over the place. And so I have to admit to being a little bit judgmental against the folks that were so tied to their building. That was until the conference, some of you might remember this, had engaged in discussion at one point of possibly closing down the Virginia United Methodist Assembly Center in Blackstone and building a new one. This was before they had the fire, but they were going to close it down and build a new one, maybe closer to Glen Allen or something like that. And I don't know how many of you have been to Blackstone or not, but it's a special place. It was the old Blackstone Women's College, and a lot of special meetings there. I had my ordination interviews there. People had Emmaus walks there. All kinds of different stuff has happened in that building. A lot of people heard a call to ministry there. And so I found myself all of a sudden attached to a building too. So it's very easy to do, right? So that's why it's important for the church, though, to have a proper theology of buildings. And so one of the linchpins of a theology of any type of building, and when I say building, I'm talking about the structures, is that our buildings are really God's buildings, right? When it comes to the church, everything really, but especially the church. That our church isn't our church per se. We call it our church, but it's the Lord's church, even the building. And so that's always important to understand. It's always also important to understand that one day our church won't stand. That one day it will crumble and fall. Hopefully that's not in our lifetimes, right? Hopefully that's a long, long way out. But whether it's because the church dwindles, or the church builds another church somewhere, or whether Jesus comes and brings a new heaven and a new earth, one day that physical structure, just like all of us, won't be there anymore. So one day, and that goes for all churches, of course. As we have seen and already talked about, the church is a people. And so the church is not a building, and the building is not a church. I think that's how Tom Rainer puts it. And that's, again, remember the old nursery rhyme. And so Rainer suggests that maybe the quarantine has allowed us an opportunity to ask some questions. And these I just share with you as rhetorical questions, because I think these require a longer time to really wrestle with. But here they are that Rainer suggests. Are we using our church facilities with optimal stewardship? What can we do differently, and what can we do better? So keep those in mind as we go through the rest of this, because each of those will be touched upon. But that's always a great question for the church to be asking from time to time. Are we using our church facilities with optimal stewardship? What can we do different? What can we do better? So this isn't in the book, but it's something that I thought of. And in my brief time with you, I call it the Trinity blessing. And here's what I believe is part of the Trinity blessing. Again, I would go back to what we've been saying. The Trinity blessing is the people. But beyond that, the Trinity blessing is this. We're blessed at Trinity with a tremendous location. There's a lot of churches that would die to have our location on busy Route 3, in essence, in the center of King George, in the county seat, if you will. I guess this was brought home to me on one of the days we did a Saturday morning prayer walk. And I got back to the church, I guess they're probably around 11 or 11:30 or so. And it was one of those warmer days in the early spring, late winter. And so kind of one of those days when people all of a sudden, they come out like they've been hiding under rocks for a long time. And, I could hardly take a left out of the church. I think I sat there for 5 minutes, and I don't know if you've ever had that experience of trying to take a left out of the church there. But same thing at 4:30 in the afternoon too. But I don't know if there's ever been a study of the car count, but Trinity is certainly in a good location compared to a lot of other churches. And so I find that's a blessing of the church's location. I've also held and believed, and still believe for the future, that the field behind us holds great potential for ministry. And, obviously we've used it for some different things before, and we allow the ball groups to use it now. But a little bit later on, I'll share with you some ideas that I have for the field, and maybe the church will think about some more ideas. But I think that has great potential as well. And so here's the question, and that is, what if we viewed our location, our field, and our facilities as tools to reach our community? And so that's the pivot that Tom Rainer is going to encourage churches to take. He says this is the opportunity in the pandemic to maybe look at this to say, how can our facilities, our physical plant, if you will, our land, be tools to reach our community? So we'll talk more about that in a moment. So that's the mind shift or mindset shift. And that is, the pandemic has given us the opportunity to view our buildings differently, perhaps. So the shift is a shift from the buildings existing for our purposes to the buildings existing to help us reach more people for Christ, to begin to think about it. And I would say, in saying that, it's not either or, but it's both and. And so he says this: what if we thought more about bringing people in instead of keeping them out? What if we gave our buildings away, in a sense? And I think what he's trying to get at there is saying, what if we made it pretty easy for folks to use our buildings? So, obviously we need some semblance of, who's meeting here and what are they doing? We need some oversight over that as stewards of the church and the buildings. But how is there a way to make it easier? Is there a way to invite other groups perhaps to use it? And so then I put this part, and this is my part: warning, this can get messy. And so here's what I mean. In different churches I've been a part of, churches that I've consulted with before, they've talked about opening up their buildings and facilities for community groups. I think of like maybe preschools that aren't a part of, they're not a ministry of the church. It's a separate preschool that just meets at the church. Or I think of like scout groups sometimes that might use a building, or, whatever group that might be using your building. You all of a sudden get a comment from say a Sunday school teacher or the kitchen committee. I don't know, do y'all have the kitchen committee at Trinity? We had the kitchen committee at one of my churches, and I put the spoon in the wrong place and I got my hand smacked. So you don't have to answer.
Yeah, we have a de facto kitchen committee.
Okay.
That's a good term. That's the term I was trying to think of. De facto, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that one's not on the nominations and personnel committee report.
One of the committee members is not with us anymore.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He was not only about the kitchen, he was about the whole church that way.
Okay. Yeah. So what happens though is that those folks, and they're well-meaning folks, and I'm not trying to diminish them, but stuff out of place, a wrapper left where it shouldn't, some food left out, so it can be problematic. It can get messy, both literally and figuratively, in terms of when you have lots of groups come in. So I say that because, it sounds great. Let's have a bunch of groups come. And in my mind, the church should be about that. But the church, if it does that, should recognize that it's not always going to be neat and tidy. Again, you try to have guidelines and rules for folks to follow, but we know that they don't always get followed. So.
Well, I think that's a part of the book. I think it's on page 19. It says looking for signs. And 3 of the 6 windows here were involved in developing a 26-page Safe Sanctuaries document, which is required reading if you're going to have children, youth, or vulnerable adults.
Yep,
so, I'm not saying that wasn't a necessary thing to do, but that's not an inviting thing to have to go through in addition to the sign-up form. So,
yeah.
On the one hand, you're pushed by liability and safety concerns. On the other hand, you've got things that you want to be open and accessible. So I'm not sure where the right middle ground is.
Yeah, but that's a great point, Mike. There certainly is a tension. So,
but at least it wasn't 64 pages like his example in the book.
It makes me feel much better, Dave.
No.
Yeah. 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 A little bit of it kind of reminds me of trying to get the government to approve something. So like a permit or something like that. And I've had the opportunity to go before the planning commission and then the city council in this case, or the board of supervisors. And there's folks that are on those boards that want to find every reason why it won't work instead of trying to find ways for it to work. And so, that might be helpful in thinking about, outside groups and things like that. And you certainly need to have those provisions in place. And there's some that we just can't get around. hence the child protection policy, which isn't probably a bad thing at the end of the day, but it does make it a little bit more onerous for sure. Here's one that I thought was good that he lifted up. What if we asked how our church facilities could be used by the community? What if we asked the community how our church facilities could best serve them? And so initially my thought in seeing that question was thinking about, like, the government community. But I guess there would be other, when we think about community, the community is just not, the social services or, the Parks and Rec per se, the kind of the county entities, but also, I guess just the community in general. So one church I heard of put an ad in the newspaper advertising free space for birthday parties. Talk about getting messy. But that was a overture to the community to say, you don't have to go rent this place per se, but we'll allow you. Maybe they ask for a small donation to cover cleaning or something like that. But anyways, that's the type of thing and the type of idea to have those conversations with community leaders to say, how might the church be used? So one of the examples he gives in the book is one church created, and this is not to say that Trinity should, I don't know that we have the space to do this or it's needed, but a break room for law enforcement officers to stop and to replenish whatever, rest, get coffee, I suppose. So that would be an example of that type of thing. So, we said one of our learnings from quarantine were our facilities are tools, not necessities. So though we couldn't have the building in some sense, especially before we went even to in-person worship, we still had our church. And so we love our church, and the church is the primary gathering place when we can gather, but it's not an absolute necessity, the building. So maybe the mind shift is that we can see with fresh eyes that our facilities perhaps can be a tool for outreach and not just a place for members to gather. And so, if Rob Gates was here, he'd remind us that in the long range plan, that one of the things that came forth in that was a desire amongst those that contributed to that for the church to be engaging the community. And, when I came and had conversation with some folks and asked about what was happening at the church, it seemed to be that with Ned's tenure, and maybe before that, but especially with Ned's tenure, they lifted up that the church began to become more engaged with the community. I think some of the examples lifted up was there was a Christmas tree lighting event for the county that some Trinity folks participated in. I think during Ned's time, there was a prayer walk that happened. There was just different things that began to happen. And so, sort of that flavor could very much fit in here of, how can we make our buildings, which are really God's buildings, available to the community as a way to bless our community. So definitely something to think about. So here are some of the ideas that he had shared. The large break room for law enforcement, a medical clinic. Again, I'm not sure these would work at Trinity. I'm not suggesting they are, but we're doing the blood drive. A food pantry. I've kind of thought about that one before because, and I don't know, some of you might know better than I do about where do people have to go. I know Love Thy Neighbor certainly gives food, and does the social services office have a food pantry itself?
Yes.
Okay, so they're fairly close. So they suggest in the book washers and dryers for people to come and do their laundry. I don't know that that's a huge need in our community. Maybe it is, but so these are some of the ones I came up with. Movie nights, I thought especially for that field to be able to get a blow up screen and you could also do this, social distancing by family pod, and people bring their own type of food when it gets to that point where the church is comfortable doing that type of thing. Again, I just looked at that location in the front seems to me made for like a drive-through prayer thing. And again, during the pandemic, we couldn't have people rolling down their windows and someone coming up to their window and, putting their face in the window and praying for them. But I've also seen other churches do for Ash Wednesday, drive-through ashes for folks that want to come through. So, we could come in that one entrance and go out the other and, ask folks to go right before they go left so they didn't have to back things up. And then the other thing I thought about was oftentimes when I come via Route 3, I always pass I think it's called Bloomia.
Mhm.
You all familiar with Bloomia?
Mhm.
And so they, for the last 2 springs, did tulip giveaways in downtown Fredericksburg, just to bless people with some flowers. And so why not? We could do that in the middle of King George, especially since that's a King George. I think maybe it's Stafford. King George closed at least company.
It's King George.
It's King George.
It's definitely King George.
Is it King George? Okay, I wasn't sure. So obviously we had been and currently are doing some of this already, right? So we've had AA meet. We have a blood drive that's scheduled now. We used to have the community service board group that used to come. The ball teams have come. So maybe the question for the church moving forward for the future is, could or should we do more? And so that can be one of the questions to wrestle with. Having talked about all that, did any ideas come to you all's mind about potential things that the church can do?
Well, we're right across from the op shop, so you could potentially, have a breakfast occasionally on Saturday mornings when the op shop is swamped with people, or some type of carry-out bag of breakfast food or something. Just as something that popped in my mind.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
I thought with Curves closing, it would be nice to offer some sort of exercise group, small group, to Christian music, or we've done that in the past. We've done yoga there, but especially since Curves is closing, has closed.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you could even do that outside if weather was good.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I remember Ned set up a little table between services and with donuts. Just hopefully people would stop as they're driving on Route 3. We got that maybe twice.
Okay.
In 5 weeks, but hey.
This might be a little more complicated, but one of my favorite things in high school was the Presbyterian Church fixed a breakfast for us on exam days. And we all met, and the men got together and made pancakes. It wasn't complicated, it was just pancakes. But we just went by church, had pancakes and coffee, and went on out to the high school. I didn't know if something like that might be coordinated with the high school.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I've always wanted to have a meal at church in early evening, where parents that have busy lives could come and just eat.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen also one church do a completely free car wash to bless the community. So they would hold a car wash, but they didn't accept any money. So even if when people did want to give money, they refused to just pass on kindness to somebody else. And so I don't know if there's a spigot in the front of the church or not, or a hose long enough to get from the back, but have to get some of our youth involved in that. But those are some great ideas. So
there was something that just came to my mind that that Ned did one time. I think it was done in the December that he was here before the pandemic started, but it was blessing of the animals.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that could be advertised to the community, and anyone could bring their pet or pets to that sort of, I don't know whether you call it a service or event, and you get to meet new people in that way.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one.
I kind of wondered about you were talking about, speaking with other groups of the community, not just the government. And I wonder if other churches are thinking the way we are. Could we talk to the Catholic Church? Could we talk to the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians and so forth? I have a room that does this. You have a yard that does that. And yeah, we're gonna stay Catholics and Baptists and Methodists and everything else like that. But why can't we share where there is an opportunity to share? Their church their property has one thing, we have another. To reach out in those ways and see if we can't get something going there.
Yeah, for sure. And we had, Mike, you might remember, I think it was a scouting troop that meets at the Episcopal Church, I think, wanted to use our field, I think. And this was
correct.
A couple months ago.
Right.
And so we allowed them to do that. But that's the exact type of thing. I mean, I don't know what they were doing there exactly, but we did have that cooperation, so that was neat. So good. All right, well, those are some great ideas. Some other building ideas that the pandemic pause allows. They talked in there about sign survey and evaluation. Kind of how good is our signage? So kind of in this time as we're not fully back yet, and who knows when we'll be fully back. Maybe this would be a good time to do what I call a sign survey, to say, try to put on the glasses of, if I'm a brand new person, do I know where to park? Do I know which door to go in? Do I know where is there signs to say where the bathrooms or the children's ministry is? Just anything like that could make it easier for a new person to be able to navigate their way. That might be something that's worth doing, that they kind of point out here. And then this time also might represent an opportunity to clean up and clean out and freshen up our building. So I always encourage churches to ask, if I were a new person, a mom and dad with small kids, what would be my response to the building? And so would I say, oh yeah, this is a great place. It's clean. They have up-to-date things. The carpet's not frayed, and yeah, they got a changing table, or I don't know, any of that stuff, to just begin to ask those questions about what is the presentation of our building, especially to newer folks. So perhaps this pandemic pause, if you will, allows us the opportunity to ask some of those questions and look with new eyes, or invite somebody else to come in and give us their opinion about that. Just food for thought. So he has a couple of discussion questions. One is, can you think of one innovative way your church could use its facilities, perhaps something that has never been done before? I think we covered that one early on when we talked about the ideas, but if anybody else has anything else, you can go ahead and shout it out. And the second one is, think of ways your church could possibly partner with the local government or schools to use your facilities. We talked about pancake breakfast, perhaps, for somebody. One thing I saw some other churches do is to offer space for tutoring. I know we have some that do that already online, or I don't know, Ben and Mike, did you all also go to the school when you could?
Yeah.
We did, yes.
Okay.
One afternoon a week.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
that's how I ended up being a teacher. Started with it.
You did it as well.
Started with the tutoring, and kind of went from there.
Cool. Yeah. So okay. So they haven't recruited you all yet, Ben and Mike, to teach?
Mike did.
Oh, did you? Cool.
Yeah, I did three spring semesters back 15 years ago.
Oh, okay.
They
Wow,
were,
so
they
it's
were
been that
short of
long?
somebody to teach a class, so I did that.
Wow. So cool.
Yeah, I thought of something, not necessarily tutoring. Some children just need someone to look up to, more a mentor type thing. Especially we have older folks, we could be a grandma or a grandpa to a child. Just, I mean, you may end up tutoring them, but maybe that's not your, your critical thing that you're doing with them. You're just working with them, becoming their friend and loving them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've heard of one church that they were able to discern from having conversations in their community with social services or school principals that latchkey kids, as we used to call them, were an issue. And so they opened up their church for an after-school program. Again, that takes a certain amount of, obviously human resources to be able to do that, space, depending on how many kids you're going to have, all kinds of issues and questions about that. But it's just an example of, partnering, I guess, to do that type of thing. All right. Well, that was challenge one. Thanks. That was good conversation, and appreciated you all's ideas and creativity about that. The second one is having to do with seizing your opportunity to reach the digital world. And so I know we, as a church council, already began to have some discussion in regards to this in different fits and starts. But obviously, COVID caused the technological disruption. But again, look at how far we have come as a church. We started streaming and recording services. But the interesting thing is that, what used to be something nice that usually larger churches did, streaming their service, making their service available online, right? It was just kind of an afterthought. It was something that became imperative for us as a church and for many churches, right? To be able to do that. It became a necessity for us. And not only that, but I put here at the end, the other challenge that Trinity Church rose up to meet was the fact that, not only did we have to get online, but for the people that had internet, but we have, a handful of folks, probably, I don't know, 2 to 5, that they don't do the internet at all. They don't have a computer, or they don't have access, or whatever the issue is. And so they had to do phone and call in. And so we were able to pivot and to do that. We also pivoted and discovered that we could do groups and meetings online using Zoom. And so again, Zoom is a double-edged sword. It's been great, and it's the best that we've had to use, perhaps. It does get a little tiresome after a while. We have the, I call them the Brady Bunch squares, or some people call them the Hollywood squares there. And but it was a good way for us to bridge the gap in this in-between time. And so one of the questions I think that the church will need to ask and to answer moving forward, and again, this isn't necessarily a question to answer tonight, is, as we come out of pandemic, should we continue to have some meetings that won't be in person, but that might be Zoom meetings? And the idea being that maybe that's a better use sometimes of our time and resources. What I mean by that is, not everyone's like me and a half hour away, but I don't know, Ben and Annette, how far are you from the church? 15 minutes?
Yeah, that's a good estimate.
Okay, so it takes you 30 minutes to drive. So there might be times when, like tonight, you didn't have to drive 15 minutes one way and 15 minutes the other way to come.
Right.
And I think of especially persons that are working, and getting home for a meeting, it might be more convenient for them to just jump on a Zoom meeting have dinner with their family. Maybe it frees them up then to have dinner with their family instead of traveling time to and from the church. Or it could be maybe that you do a hybrid thing. We had that wonderful TV there in the large screen TV in the fellowship hall, that maybe there's 4 or 5 people around the table, and we're able to hook it up so that it can also be connected to a computer and be a Zoom screen with a camera on it. And so you can see whoever's zooming in up there, and they can see you at the table and hear you. And I've participated in meetings like that where some were in person and some were, on Zoom. So it'll be an interesting kind of question. So any quick thoughts about that? Again, we don't have to solve it tonight and make a decision. That's not why I bring it up, but just as a thought moving forward.
It's certainly made for an efficient charge conference.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
I think it's necessary that evolve and that we find different ways to use it to create hybrids. People want to be together on Sunday morning, but that doesn't mean that the entire service needs to be streamed. There can be pre-recorded segments and so forth.
Yeah.
But I think it needs to be something that we continue to have available for some of the very reasons that you've said. It's people have gotten used to it. People can use it. I hope that the services will be better. The lag will disappear or at least be minimized. But this is way too convenient for a number of different things to get together, if only because Annette doesn't need to spend 30 minutes. I don't need to spend 70 minutes on the road to go to a meeting at the church.
Okay. Yeah.
So I really want this to be continued, but I do think it needs to evolve in a number of different ways to be as user-friendly as it possibly can be in a number of different ways.
Yeah, great. Good points. Your words bring to mind a couple of different things. One is that, one thing that has changed in our community, and I think that's one of the discussion questions, is, how many people got used to working from home? And so there's that idea now of, kind of working from home and not necessarily being in person at everything. So, and then the second thing is, and this is a conversation maybe for the task force that is being set up for the online type of stuff. But one of the things I heard in one of the webinars that the conference did was that, they suggested if and when you do go from, in our case, recording to actual streaming, there's certain things that happen in the worship service that don't play well when you're streaming. So what do I mean by that? If you're passing the offering plate for 7 minutes, and I'm watching at home, I really don't care to watch the offering plate being passed for 7 minutes. Or if you're receiving communion by intinction, or even not, and that takes 10 minutes, you see. So maybe, there's some pre-recorded bits like you were talking about, Chip, that, are played for the online audience, if you will, for lack of a better term, during those times. So again, these are all new days, new things to think about, for sure.
I really like the idea that was suggested by those guys about the online host.
Yes.
It was a really nice idea to have somebody to kind of introduce the service and then close the service.
Yeah, that was a good idea. And so I have to say, Annette has kind of acted as a little bit of an online host for us and saying hello to folks, or maybe it was Ben and Annette. I don't know, because sometimes y'all share, but saying hello to folks, or good morning, or things like that, liking people's posts, that type of stuff. But yeah, having that online host is a great idea. So again, does it allow others to participate if they wouldn't otherwise? So, maybe you get some elderly folks even that won't travel out at night, but they're technologically savvy enough that they'll connect to a computer. And so at the end,
do you know too that we're getting people attending from, geographically distant areas?
Yeah, we really are. We do. There's some new names that I see every now and then that will have liked, or even some that will fill out a registration form. And I think, who is that? And I have to go ask Lori, do you know this person? And so So yeah, so that's right. And that's what part of what we're going to talk about is that, and expanding that mission field, it kind of breaks down that geography of place. So I don't think I'm out of in left field. And this isn't something many other people haven't said already, but at the end of the day, I believe that there'll be a blending of digital and in person. So the kind of the words that are being used for that is kind of hybrid worship, right? Where it's online and in person. But then the word that I have heard that I like better is phygital, both physical and digital. So phygital. So
the kids
there you
will
go.
like that.
Yeah. So again, getting back to a mindset change, maybe a mindset change is in order so that instead of seeing our digital strategy as just one that, hey, we had to get it online so that, we had something so that our folks could worship, to get us through the pandemic, to help our members stay connected. What if we saw our digital strategy as a way to engage a new mission field? So kind of, John, what you were getting at, geographically and, all of a sudden you're online and your mission field goes from the 15,000, 20,000 people and however many there are in King George County to millions of people, even those outside the United States. So the harder question becomes if a church gets really serious about their digital ministry, and again, this is task force stuff, then like you were saying, B, like those gentlemen were saying on the webinar, how do you then engage those people? How do you then disciple people that aren't going to darken the door of your church? How do you get them involved in a small group? How do you begin to make connections and relationships with them when they're only showing up to watch on a Sunday morning? So those are larger questions, but definitely a mission field there. The digital world is not just a tool for convenience in the mind shift, but primarily a tool to reach the mission fields. So if we think this is true, then the question then becomes, what does this mean for us and for our practices moving forward? So as I see it, that the church and the I'm not sure what we're calling that task force, technology task force or streaming task force or what, but ultimately the church will have to make a decision whether they'll want to invest in kind of seeing that digital space as a mission field and investing it people-wise as well as monetarily, or whether it would just kind of be something for convenience. So what I mean by like for convenience is, so-and-so misses a Sunday because they're traveling or have sports, so they can come back and watch it online type of thing. Or I think what Tom Rainer's suggesting and many others is that churches, as they are able, kind of seize this opportunity to make it more than that. But, again, the church has to decide for itself what will be best for it moving forward. But if you do decide to, then you need a plan. And so he talks about, missionaries that go to the mission field don't go without a plan. They always have a plan. So obviously, as I mentioned at Trinity, we have set up a task force. That's just the beginning of it. But he lists 3 different groups to think about in your church moving forward. He talks about one, the digital only crowd. So those are people like the elderly that can't come to service, maybe armed services folks that are serving in other places, people that are in different geographic places that prevent them from coming to worship. Hey, there's still going to be persons concerned with COVID. Okay. It's going to take a long time for some people to get back. And then, as I think I've talked about before, there's just going to be new persons that are going to want to check out the church before they come in person. And so they're going to want to watch online. Then there's the digitally transitioning. They mostly connect to the church digitally and rarely, if ever, attend in-person gatherings, but they do maybe from time to time. And then finally, there's dual citizens. These people are people that connect to the church online and in person. So as the plan is made, it'll be important to keep those folks in mind, those 3 groups.
Well, there's the fourth group of people that don't have internet.
There is. And so will you continue to offer a phone option for them?
I added a fourth group when I was reading that chapter.
Okay. Yeah. And so then if you do a phone group, how will you do that? So right now we're able to do that because we record beforehand and upload what we call the MP3 file, getting a little in the weeds technologically, so that they can listen to it just like a song. But there's also services out there that will let you just connect with the phone. So here's a big question that he poses. Prayer. So where does prayer fit in all of this as a church coming out of a pandemic? We have to be sure that we don't get ahead of the Lord, right? You've heard me say, we've talked about, surest way to make God laugh, tell him your plans, right? And so how do we listen for God, and how do we discern what God is saying? And so I have found in most churches that I've both pastored and been associated with or had an interaction with, that when we say we're going to pray about it, it's kind of perfunctory type of prayer. It's either, we're going to pray at home in our prayer time, or it's we give a little bit of time at the beginning and the end. And again, guilty as charged. But what would it look like for us to take seriously prayer in this time? Because let's face it, none of us has come out of a pandemic before, right? None of us has done this. So we really need the Lord's strength. We need the Lord's wisdom. And so we need to be on our knees. And so would it be worthwhile for the church in the future to produce a prayer guide to give out to members? Would it be worthwhile to have either an online or a monthly prayer meeting moving forward to pray about this, but everything else too? Maybe a one-time 24-hour prayer vigil, even if you do that at your homes, where certain people sign up to, I'll do from 9 to 10 at night. And who will be the brave person that picks from 2 to 3 in the morning? Someone that can't sleep, I guess. But, stuff like that, that is more, it moves beyond just the kind of, we'll pray about it, to, no, we're really praying about it. We're taking prayer seriously. So I think that was a good suggestion that was in the book. What would it look like to commit coming out of COVID as a church to the Lord in prayer? Anybody else have any thoughts about that, about how the church could possibly do that?
Well, I think we did a day, and I forget if it was just the committee or what the group was, that Ned was having a day of fasting and prayer before as we kind of got into the first thoughts of what to do with when COVID hit.
Yeah, that's great. Combining fasting and prayer. So, yep.
Well, I think the other thing that dovetails into this that the author addresses is this whole concept of simple church. Knowing either with the first chapter or the second chapter, you can't be all things to all people. So pick and choose what you want to do so that you can attempt to excel at those things.
Yep, exactly. So thanks, Mike, because you set me up for my next slide.
That's what
so
I'm
big caution. Simple church, right? So Tom Rainer and another fellow, Eric Geiger, wrote a great book a number of years ago. It's called Simple Church. Basic premise of it was that the church over the years, a lot of churches over the years have gotten so many things added to it, different committees and ministries and events, that it has caused the church to lose focus about the main things, which he would define as the Great Commission, reaching people for Christ, and the Great Commandment, loving God and loving neighbor. Not to say that those things are always exclusive, but sometimes the busyness of the church takes away from those things. So that book advocated for the church to let go of the good things that crowded out the main things, Great Commission, Great Commandment. They said that the unintended consequences sometimes of a full church calendar, of a busy church, were many. And so they shared some of those. Some church members were so busy going to church, they failed to be on mission in the community. They spent all their time at church. They were never outside the church. They just spent all their time around Christians. Church members spent so much time in the building instead of out in the community. Families would suffer as well in a busy church. Sometimes parents had fewer hours for families because of the steady stream of activities at church. So I think that's a very slippery slope that all the churches must guard against. And I mean, you guys know, I mean, I'm not, how will I say it? I'm preaching to the choir here. I mean,
Literally.
We're not yeah, we're not meeting for, I mean, even this time of pandemic, we're not meeting tomorrow for Wednesday night Bible conversations, but there's 3 of us on here tonight that were together yesterday for Healthy Church Team. There's 3 of us here because we love the church and we're leaders in the church that were here on Monday, and the same 3 would be here on Wednesday. You know, they could be here on Wednesday if they chose to, right? If they felt the need to. And so, and that's just in time of pandemic when we're not even as busy as we usually are. And so, you know, people kind of have to watch it because they can get burned out. They can run into these things where their families suffer, or we spend so much time at the church that we're never outside of the church doing ministry and mission. So Mike, to your point, which your initial point had set up all this, is that yes, we can't do everything, right? And so he says, you know, that choose what you can do and do it well. And so, you know, because busyness can't replace effectiveness. And so don't miss those main things. So find those areas that you can do well and do those. And so, you know, all of those ideas that we threw out, you know, we can't do them all, right? So, but we might be able to do a couple and do them well. Here are some of his discussion questions. Think of the differences in our community since the pandemic and the implications for how you will do ministry in this new era. I don't know if anyone could, it took me until we were just been talking in this time to figure out one of those differences. And that, for me, that difference was people working from home might, you know, have an effect on, you know, having Zoom meetings or not having Zoom meetings. But was there anything else that you can think of? I couldn't before, like I said, tonight, when I first saw that question.
There's lots of differences.
Okay.
There's curbside pickup.
Huh?
You can't go into Wawa and make your own cup of coffee anymore. Someone's got to do that for you.
Mhm.
Like I said before, the curves closed.
Good.
There's Amazon is, you know, the Amazon trucks are constantly up and down the roads. I mean, there's just lots of things that when you think of about the pandemic in general.
Yeah, that's great. I wasn't thinking in those ways. So thank you. So I guess the question would be, any of those things, would they affect the ministry of the church though? So I guess they might affect chicken barbecue dinner.
Certainly curbside service could be offered. I've heard last summer of Bible schools being offered, and you get kits.
Yeah. With
the stuff that you would get at home, so they would drive by and pick it up. So certainly curbside would be something we would use.
Okay. Sure.
I mean, people at one time were very funny about food, about, you know, whether you'd want somebody else's food. I think we've kind of gotten past that. Yeah. But that's something that we could offer, is some sort of food or a product curbside.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned earlier about having some sort of exercise.
Yeah.
As a replacement for curves.
Yep. Oh, all good ones. Anybody else have any comments?
Change in thinking. I think that the pandemic has emphasized some differences, and I'm not taking sides. I do take sides, but I'm not taking sides for my point. But I think that there are people have become less trusting. People have chosen sides. People have decided which way they go on various issues, whether they're health issues or governmental restriction issues or whatever. I think that we as a church need to be very, very aware of that. Not to be frightened by it, not to be daunted by it, but to be aware that it's there. That I have talked to people that I thought had one opinion, and it turns out they had a completely different opinion. They approached this thing very differently than I thought that they would, or than I did, perhaps. And that, you know, like I said, I have my personal opinion, but putting that aside, you have to be aware of that and deal with it. And find ways to deal with that. So I think that's a big.
I love that, Chip, because I think you're right. I mean, I think, you know, in our society, as divided as we are in so many ways, you know, and even in the pandemic, it has turned, you know, divided and spirited on each side, on multiple sides. That can the church be a place where grace is the main operator, and we deal with each other in abundance of grace? And so, if there's no other place that it should happen in the church, right? So sometimes we don't always do it and live up to it, right? We've seen that in the denominational level.
You know, a thought just crossed my mind because I saw a little funny post that was doing something else, but a drive-by setting. But we could set up like a drive-by grace or drive-by prayers or that sort of thing. Just stop by and we'll say a prayer for you, or remind you that you are full of God's grace and all that kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could use a lot more grace, that's for sure. Here's a second question. Think of which social media channels might be the most effective for your church right now. Any thoughts about what's the most effective social media channel?
Well, I did a little survey. I went out on Twitter and TikTok. And TikTok. I didn't see much in the way of discipleship as examples in those two. They were something that, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking wrong, but they're just not something I think would work. But it is a way to get to younger audiences.
Yeah, so it's really, social media is an interesting animal. Of course, we know that it's a double-edged sword, right? You know, we got cat photos, political rantings, and I think for most of us, like it for is keeping up with friends and family and celebrating anniversaries and birthdays and graduations and all those wonderful types of things that we get to share with that we might not have been able to share with before. And obviously social media has its good points and bad points, but one of the things I think that social media offers us is, and it's interesting because used to be that social media was for young people, right? Well, now like my kids that say, Dad, Facebook is for old people.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all about the TikTok and the whatever it is, Snapchat, all that stuff. So, I think the majority of our mission field, if you will, and both folks within our church and outside of our church, I would have to answer this question to say probably Facebook is the most effective channel for us. It's the one we're most comfortable with.
Followed by YouTube.
Yeah, and I would say for video, YouTube is really good. And I've been surprised YouTube gets about as many views as Facebook on our services. So
yeah, that's one thing about TikTok is once you put something out there, then it can easily get out of control. I mean, TikTok's made for people to use each other's stuff.
Yeah.
So someone could take your thing and make something else out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think more videos about what we do and who we are. I had the thought of when we got together recently on a meeting, people were talking about the church and why they liked coming to church and what the church meant to them.
Yes.
I think if people in general would talk about why they love Trinity and make a video of it and put it out on YouTube, it might attract people in a different way.
Yeah, and then you can post that on your website too. So have it on different places, post on Facebook as well, so good stuff. And so this was a question that I raised earlier, and not one that we'll solve tonight, but maybe one better for that task force. Think of how your church could connect best with a non-Christian who has only a digital connection to your church. So if someone shows up and they're liking our Facebook or YouTube video, or leaving a comment, or registering their attendance, how do we follow up with them? Just like we should follow up with new people in our church that come, right? And treat them well, and maybe send them a note, or call, or bring bread, whatever the church wants to do. So how do we do that in a digital way? So
I think having some sort of service project where you could invite people in the community to help out, where it's not a religious thing at all. It's helping some way, like the blood drive, if you wanted volunteers to help with that, then you could make a connection other than in worship service.
Yeah, the mission projects are great on-ramps for people, and even people that aren't Christian like to do service. So those are great on-ramps, and for folks to get connected with one another. All right, well, I said this wouldn't be longer than an hour and a half. Well, at least I said that in my mind, and so it's got an hour and a half. So I want to be sensitive to everyone's time and appreciate everyone's. And I thought we had some good conversation and good thoughts, and hopefully it was helpful for you, and hopefully the book was helpful for you. I think we meet again in June, and so I don't remember the date right off the top of my head, but it's a couple of weeks here, I think. And so we'll take the next 2 challenges, so whatever those are, 3 and 4. I haven't read ahead. I started to read 3, but
the 15th is the next one.
Okay, thank you. June 15th. So we'll do 3 and 4, and next time I'll leave a little more free time for us to have some more discussion, and things that struck you all in the book that we might not have talked about, and that type of thing. So any last words or comments?
Well, I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want to leave this on a negative note, but I'm a little bit disappointed as to how many people signed up to participate in this. I was hoping that there would be more. Kind of gets back to the 80-20 rule. That the faces that I see here are the faces of the people who are doing a lot of things in the church, and it would be nice to have wider participation, but I don't know what the answer is. So
Yeah, not sure, Ben, if that's a product of just the 80-20 rule, busyness, lack of advertisement, or what, but but yes, I hear you. So, any other comments? Okay, well,
great information.
Oh, thanks. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and end for tonight, and we'll end by saying the Mitzvah Prayer, which is, may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. So if you know it, go ahead and say it. If you don't, just listen in and pray along with us. So let's pray. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Amen.
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 Thanks,
All
Rob.
right. Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Good night. God bless.
thank you.
Night. Thanks.